The following is an exclusive presentation of WI Garden Media, the voice of Garden Talk Radio.
Well, Holly, composting is something that we all either are not doing and should be doing, or are doing and cannot produce enough compost for our gardens, but we are saving the waste from going into the landfills.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think that many people think that composting has to be complicated, or for some reason maybe expensive in a way, or that they're going to attract unwanted wildlife to their yard. And these are valid concerns, but maybe we should bust some of those myths.
Okay, so if you're in a rural setting, you can pretty much put anything in the compost you want if it's far enough away from your residence. But raccoons and possums and stuff are going to get in there and turn it over to eat the meat or dig through for bugs. So it's kind of aerating itself. If you're in a suburban or urban setting, you want to avoid milk, dairy, meat, bones, because that's going to attract those unwanted animals into your property.
Right. And another thing you can do is, if you are concerned about maybe your municipality or your HOA, you can find out what the rules are, if there are any, or maybe you've heard a neighbor say, like, this community has rules about composting.
Most
something
do.
Like that. And most do, and that's totally valid. So you can find out the rules. A lot of times the rules are just that it needs to be contained.
Some of them, I've spoken to some people where it has to be enclosed, whether it's in a tumbler or something with a lid, some type of way in which it prevents the material from getting spread apart or dispersed or dug through. So keep that in mind. And there's hundreds of different types of composting apparatuses that you can put your compost in, whether it is on the ground in a couple of self-made pallet boxes, or a tumbler, or some type of mechanism in order to heat the compost to get it to the adequate temperature, which is, I think it's 170 degrees, 160 degrees for 72 hours, something like that, to kill the viable seeds, core temperature. And some you mix, some you turn a lever in order for it to make it mix. And there are two forms of composting, hot and cold.
Right. And so cold composting is when you just basically toss your compostable material into a bin or a pile, or
Let it be.
And then hot composting it's two things now. It's when you either buy a composter bin that is meant for hot composting, or kind of the sped up composting. And then the second one is the traditional hot composting, where you're mixing a certain amount of nitrogens or greens to browns,
Yes.
which is
easy ratio is 50-50.
Yeah. And so what happens is that nitrogen will help break up the compost and also break down those seeds. And then it does make the composting happen a little bit faster. And a lot of times you do have to mix it up a bit more. So a lot of people who hot compost will compost in something that is either contained but has a large opening, or even like those rolling compost tumblers, that's the word, things like that.
So hot composting kills the seeds if done correctly, and you can do it like within a tumbler or on the ground. Cold composting, you're going to break the materials down. It's going to take a prolonged period of time. If time is not an issue for you, you just do not feel comfortable throwing it in the trash, or you just have a pile way out in the back and you take a bucket every couple of days back there, and over the course of 2-3 years, then you have a big pile of compost. That cold composting, when you cold compost, it's not, cold per se. There is some aerobic activity inside of that composting pile, but it's not going to get to the elevated temperatures to kill all the viability in the seeds, the weed seeds that you are mixing in. So you're going to have weed seeds that are going to sprout when you utilize this compost in your garden. So keep that in mind, that whenever you use it, yes, it's compost, it's black, it's what you want. But if it's in the cold composting state, you're going to have seeds of weeds that are going to sprout.
So one thing you can do and I'm just going to get off topic a teeny bit, is if you use that compost in your garden, you're concerned about the weed seeds creating weeds, you can always put it at the bottom. Like maybe you're trying to fill a raised bed, or even just some sort of large container. You can put that at the bottom of your container, and that will help not give the weeds prevent the weeds from growing. And that's fine. Otherwise, when you do plant, that's your only option to plant in, you can mulch helps suppress weeds.
Based on how big your pile is, if it is to the point where, okay, it's composted, it's completed, you could cover it with a black tarp in order to intensify that heat into the pile to try to kill off a few more of those seeds. But the percentile in which you're going to kill off will be some, but not substantial. You're still going to have. But the convenience of that cold composting is throw it in, walk away, and forget it. You don't have to tumble it. You don't have to mix it. You don't have to figure out the ratio. It's just dump and go. And it can be applicable in certain applications much more than the hot composting, in which you want to do and you fill raised beds and you have no weeds and it looks pristine and magazine cover wonderful. There are pros and cons to both of them.
Absolutely. And I think that if you are realistic about the composting process, you can find something that works well for you and your needs and however busy you are. But I would completely recommend composting if you can do it. And then there are things like kitchen composting where you can get little composters. Another thing to keep in mind is that even if you're not going to compost, you can always just, if you have a garden, you want to toss in some kitchen items as you're planting.
Trench planting.
Yeah, do a little bit
trench composting.
Trench composting. And then another thing to keep in mind is if something says it's compostable, like a packaging, I know sometimes the grocery stores where I shop, the produce bags say compostable. If you don't put those things into soil or compost or whatever, they're just going to go into the landfill. They're not going to compost down.
Correct.
And so
that's
something to keep in mind as well.
But it doesn't indicate, sometimes it doesn't indicate the time in which it takes to break down. It may take 5 or 10 years to break down, but it will break down. But it takes 5 to 10 years to break down.
Yeah, and that's very true. But a lot of these are these plastic produce bags, and you can feel the difference when the compostable ones versus the traditional or whatever you call it.
Right.
Yeah.
So composting, it can be very simplistic or it can be very complex, however you want to look at it, between hot composting and cold composting, kitchen composting, or scrap trench composting, or you can even do vermicomposting where you incorporate worms, whether it's inside or in a climatized environment to where the worms are not going to be too cold or too warm, and you can incorporate your kitchen scraps into that mechanism in order for the worms to break it down naturally, and then you have worm castings and a very good material in order to start seeds in and or dress around side dress plants and feed them the worm castings that you can benefit your plants can benefit from.
Absolutely. And there's
worm composting, if done right, it does not smell. And there's certain ways to do it, either customized DIY or commercially available kits in which you can create a worm composting bin, and you get the worm or the compost juice and then also the worm castings and a lot of benefits. And it's a way to get young people into composting as well. And the benefit to worm compost bins, the worms are smarter probably than some humans because they don't overpopulate their colony. Once their colony reaches a certain population, they stop reproducing. That's the unique aspect of worm composting. And you can always break that colony apart and split it in half, and then those two colonies will begin to reproduce again because they see there's a vacancy in population and they have to fulfill the requirements that the worms know internally. So it's really neat.
Worms are very smart.
Right.
Yes. So you could be smart too.
With Walton's Incorporated?
Yes, with Walton's Incorporated. So Walton's Incorporated has everything you need to go from animal to edible. So we know you care about your garden, your composting, your canning, vegetables, whatever. But at Walton's, you can get the equipment, seasoning, supplies to make sausage, jerky, and any other meat product your way to your high standards. Do you want to make delicious snack sticks? They have an online community called meatgistics.com to help educate people on the hows and whys of meat processing. And they have almost over 15,000 users. And then they have grinders, mixers, sausage stuffers. They use Excalibur seasonings, the same exact ones that professional processors use. They have all sorts of great stuff, and that's at waltonsinc.com. The website for the community of meat processors is meatgistics.com. So if you go to waltonsinc.com, you use code GROW50, you save 10% off orders of $50 or more. For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.